rules for Foursquare. So the first rule that I've always had in PE is that they must only hit the ball with their fingers down, no fingers up. They may have their fingers sideways if they're reaching for a ball that might be just barely out of reach. The ball can only bounce in your square one time before you hit it. It must bounce one time in your square before you hit it. You can go anywhere on the playing area to go get a ball that you need to return or to hit into another square. The server must state if there are any rules. If there are not, they really should say old school rules, and then they ask if everybody is ready. Everyone must respond with yes before the server starts the round. Now, this is a typical Foursquare square. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4. When I was a kid, the Foursquare was called the king square, but I prefer we do not call it that. You can call it the server square or the Foursquare. Kids typically know what they mean. So the first square is where the newest player to the game enters, and the idea is that they work their way up to the fourth square, so you can move your way around counterclockwise, and eventually once you're in the fourth square, that person is the server. They start with the ball, and they should have their back foot on the serve line. However, I know that our four squares do not have a serve line, but their foot should be somewhere near that back corner so that they aren't getting too close to other players when they start with their serve. They can leave that line once they have served the ball. Now, on the outside of a Foursquare is what I would call the boundary line. I like to say that this one is owned by someone. So the outside line is owned by someone, so it's never shared with another person. However, the dividing line, it can be a bit confusing because, like, for example, the 4 and the 1 are sharing a line, and the number 1 and the number 2 are sharing a line. So think owned versus shared. Dividing lines are shared, and that's confusing. Owned, it's clear who owns it. The boundary lines are owned. We know who it should be going to. In this case, we have the server who's about to serve. They should move back to that serving line or back to the back corner. They need to state the rules. So then in most cases, I would say old school rules. When we're starting out the school year, I would say for the first few weeks, they should only use old school rules. And maybe a week or two in, they can start adding in different rules that they want to try or play during the game. They need to check if everybody is ready. Everyone should respond with a yes. If they say no, they should be asking or stating why they're not ready. So it might be they need to tie their shoe, or what are the rules, or they're confused by the new rules that they've never played before. So again, the server needs to do quite a few things to be a legal serve. So they have to state the rules, check if the group is ready. When they serve, they have to drop the ball so it bounces once in their square before they hit it with their fingers down. And they must serve to the first square. The person in the first square is the newest one there. It's only right that they get to hit the ball first. A lot of people think that the server is starting the game. I say the game doesn't really start until the first square person has hit the ball. And again, fingers down. So in this case, we have a ball that's hitting on a boundary line. That's the outside line of the Foursquare. So number 3 hits the ball, and it hits the line by the number 2 person. Now, the person in number 3 hit it to a line that is owned by number 2. So we know that number 2 should have got it. Number 2 can leave their square to get a ball. So when it hits that boundary line, they should have moved to try to return it. It can bounce in your square or on your boundary line, that outside line. You must return it. Once it hits the ground a second time, you are out. So in this case, number 2 moves out, number 1 moves over, and a new person moves into number 1. So hitting the ball out of bounds, I think this is pretty standard. People kind of understand this one a bit better. Basically, if you hit the ball and you send it out of bounds, it is out. Technically speaking, if someone were to catch the ball after one bounce out of bounds, the person who caught the ball would be out, but typically common sense would tell you that they were catching the ball so they didn't have to chase it across the playground. So I would still consider them that once the ball hit out of bounds, the person who hit it is out. So everyone moves up and a new person comes in. So this next one is when a ball is hit on a dividing line. This is where a lot of arguments tend to happen. So if they're hitting, they're playing back and forth. Number 4 hits it on this dividing line between 4 and 3. I've highlighted it in red. It gets confusing because that line is owned by number 4 and number 3. So whoever hit it to that line is out. Now, in this case, number 4 hit it to that line. They should be out. A lot of common sense would say 3 should have got it because 4 hit it there, but because it's a dividing line, 4 is still out because they hit it there. So if it's a dividing line, it's shared and it causes confusion because you're not sure who is supposed to get it. So if you cause confusion, you're out. So, and in this case, the number 4, the server moves out, and now we have a new server, and everyone else rotates counterclockwise, and we have a new number 1. Now, in Foursquare, we have a lot of instances where we might have to do a redo. So if the server does not state the rules, or if they do not hit with their fingers up, or if they hit with their fingers up, or they serve to the wrong square, they have to restart or redo the serve. Now, if they mess up the serve twice, they are out. So you get one chance to serve. If you mess up, you get to try again. If you mess up 2 times in a row, you're out. If you serve and number 1 is unable to return it because maybe they weren't actually paying attention even though they said they were ready, or they were standing too close to the server and the ball hit behind them, or whatever the reason might be, they just had a bad return, they get to retry, they get to redo. So then the server has to start over again. It might be that the server messes up and then the person in the first square messes up, but then the server messes up again, the server would be out. So it doesn't have to be 2 consecutive. It's if it happens 2 times before the round gets going. So if the person in the first square is playing and they're really struggling and you're noticing that every time they're getting out, I would make sure that the people in the game, even not just number 1, but to have your feet far back in the square as possible, maybe even standing on that boundary line, because it is much easier to move up to hit a ball than it is to try to move backwards and hit fingers down. So here we got a quick kind of look at when you have more than 4 people playing the game. I have people line up a few feet from the outside of the square. I prefer that they're behind the number 1 and the number 2 because it makes it a lot more clear. If they do it a little bit differently, I usually say that the person that is, or the side of the line that's closest to the number 1, that person is the next into the game. The end of the line that's furthest away from the number 1 should be the end of the line.